Lloyd Becker sat at the counter, sipping his coffee while he waited for his breakfast order. There were few people in this morning cafe. At the other end of the hall, several police officers sat at a group of tables, talking and eating. A man and woman entered, stopping at the door and looking around. Seeing Lloyd, they headed towards him. He simply shook his head and placed his coffee cup on the counter. "Lloyd Becker?" the woman asked. "Yes, what does this bitch, my ex-wife, want from me again?" "I didn't have anything left when we got divorced, and I certainly don't have anything left now," Lloyd replied. "We are not bailiffs, Mr. Becker. I'm Detective Holbrook, and this is my partner, Detective Meeker." "How can I help you, Detective?" Lloyd asked. "We need you to come with us, sir," Meeker said. At that moment, the waitress, Betty, placed Lloyd's breakfast in front of him. "We need you to come with us now," Holbrook commanded. "Am I under arrest?" Lloyd asked. "We can arrest you," Meeker said. "Well, go ahead, Detective, but I will sue you and the city if they release me today or tomorrow. I would invite you to sit down, have a cup of coffee, and ask your questions here. Maybe you can start with where I was. When Meeker reached for Lloyd's hand, but Holbrook stopped him. "Okay, Mr. Becker." "Lloyd will do, Detective," Lloyd said, chewing on an egg. "Okay, Lloyd, where were you last night from 9 to 11? Holbrook asked. "Last night, let me see. I was at a group session for divorced men at St. Vincent's Church from 8 until about 12:30. We were delayed because we had 3 new members. You can ask at the church." "Are you sure?" Holbrook asked. "Absolutely." "What's happened?" Lloyd asked. "Are you still seeing Katie Seck?" "No." "What happened to her?" Lloyd suddenly became worried. "We broke up before I was handed the summons. That was more than 3 years ago. She was attacked and severely beaten." "Will she be okay?" Lloyd asked. "The doctors say she will recover physically, but she will need a lot of help emotionally and mentally," Holbrook said. "Who could do this?" Lloyd asked, knowing he wouldn't get an answer. "That's what we're trying to find out," Holbrook said. "She said it was a man. He came to her door, and when she opened it, he burst inside, knocking her to the ground. He then tied her hands and blindfolded her. He covered her mouth so she couldn't scream. She said she heard someone else come into her apartment," Meeker said. "So there were 2 of them?" Lloyd asked. "Looks like it," Meeker replied. "Do you still need me to come with you?" Lloyd asked, no longer feeling hungry. "No. I think when we check the church, you will be removed from the list of suspects." "How many suspects do you have?" Lloyd asked. "Now, not counting you, not a single one," Holbrook said. "Thank you for your time. Bon appetit." Holbrook turned to leave. "Which hospital is she in?" Lloyd asked. "I shouldn't tell you this. St. James," Holbrook said quietly, turning to Lloyd. Lloyd nodded. Holbrook nodded. Meeker frowned. "Thank you, Detective," Lloyd replied. "Please," Holbrook said. Smiling, Detective Holbrook left the cafe. Meeker followed her. Looking at his breakfast, Lloyd shook his head and began to pick at his ham and eggs. He drank orange juice and ate toast, wondering who could have done this to Katie. Lloyd Becker, a 6-foot-tall man with minimal fat, strong muscles and blonde hair, and his wife Mary, a 5'5" woman with beautiful red hair, a pretty face, a well-proportioned chest, and a fine figure, were married 10 years ago. They were deeply in love with each other. Their life together was good. They met in college and started dating. A month later, Lloyd offered to be exclusive. Mary agreed happily. Since then, they have been together. 6 months after graduating from college, they got married. The ceremony was not large, but both families were present in the church to watch the 2 lovers make their vows to each other and to God. After a delicious honeymoon in Antigua, they settled in Austin to study. Lloyd was hired by a large software company as a systems analyst. Mary got a job in the HR department of a Fortune 500 company. Both made decent money. Lloyd sometimes went on business trips, but was never away for more than 3 days. Mary didn't have to travel at all. Both enjoyed their work and life together. As for children, they both wanted to wait until they were more mature and had amassed significant savings. On weekends, they went out together and had fun. They had friends they met at a local bar. This bar was a drinking establishment that served food. This was not a club where people met for one-night stands. They played darts or other team arcade games that came and went over the years. It was fun and harmless for the couple. Their life together was getting better, and friends saw that they were in love. Lloyd then began to notice slight changes in his wife's behavior. In the evenings, she began to stay late at work, although this had not happened in the last 6 years. Then she started going out on Fridays with the girls. Those Friday evenings grew longer and longer until she began to return home well after midnight. And when she came, sometimes she would attack Lloyd. Even if he was sleeping, she woke him up, wanting wild, unlimited intimacy. Other nights, she would simply lie quietly in bed and fall asleep after showering. Over time, he became suspicious of many little things. He found her panties in the wash with stains. He found panties he had never seen before. And I couldn't find my panties in the laundry on Saturday mornings. His suspicions were so strong that he installed a GPS device and a voice-activated audio recorder in her car. Working in the software industry, he knew of the many apps that could be installed on her phone to track her movements when she wasn't in the car. Other apps recorded her conversations and text messages, sending them to a website Lloyd created for this purpose. He also installed software that sent emails to his account if she sent emails from hers. The first Friday, when she was with the girls, the server was loaded with recordings and GPS data. She also corresponded a lot, and she took several selfies that she sent to her friends. What Lloyd saw cut him to the quick. The first selfie was of Mary kissing some guy Lloyd didn't know. The next photo showed his hand on her breast. On the next, Mary laughed while his hand remained on her chest, squeezing it. The texts were between Mary and two of her friends asking if Lloyd had called looking for them. So now two others were involved in her deception. Over the next few weeks, Lloyd had to act as if everything was normal. As far as he could tell, she didn't suspect he knew anything. Of course, he only had a few pieces of evidence in the form of selfies, text messages, and GPS data showing that after 10 o'clock every Friday night, Mary drove to an address that turned out to be a motel near the club where they met. No selfies were taken at that time, and when Lloyd checked her phone the next morning, the selfies had been deleted and the trash was empty. She also did not send any significant emails during this time. Lloyd wasn't ready for confrontation yet. The following Friday, he waited until Mary left. He then walked slowly to his car and drove away. He could see Mary's car on his phone screen, so he didn't have to drive closely behind her. He was several blocks away. He didn't even see her car. He saw her stop at the club where she went on Friday nights. Arriving a short time later, he found her car parked in the back of the lot. Looking back at the club, he saw her just entering it. Parking so that he could see the entrance to the club and Mary's car, Lloyd settled in and waited. We didn't have to wait long. Less than 20 minutes later, Mary came out with the guy she was kissing in the selfie. They went to Mary's car and got into it. After they left, Lloyd again followed at a distance. They went straight to the motel. Lloyd arrived just in time to see which room they entered. Parking so he could see the room, Lloyd got out of the car and walked to the door. He read the room number, then walked towards the office. "How can I help you, sir?" asked the man behind the counter. "Who is in room 135? Lloyd asked. "Are you a policeman?" "Does it matter?" Lloyd said, sliding $100 bill across the counter. "I think no. They registered as Mr. and Mrs. Becker." "Is it true?" "Is it true?" "Then can I have the key to my room?" Lloyd showed his ID. The man behind the counter looked at the ID. He swallowed. He knew trouble was coming. "I don't want any trouble," he said. "You won't have them unless you give me my key," Lloyd said softly. The man walked away, took the key card, and swiped it through the device, which coded the room on it. He handed it to Lloyd. "To call the police?" he asked. Lloyd stopped. He turned and looked at him, thinking. "Yes, I have no plans to harm anyone, but having their names on police reports might be interesting. But wait 10 minutes, please." The clerk nodded. Lloyd turned and left the office. As quietly as he could, he walked to the door, inserted the card into the lock, and pulled it out. The light came on and the lock mechanism clicked. Pressing the handle, he slowly opened the door. He saw the bed. Entering the room, Lloyd closed the door almost all the way. Taking his phone out of his pocket, he began filming videos with his lovers. Well, he didn't know if they loved each other, but they had sex. He quietly walked over to the bed, capturing the sights and sounds of their sex. The anger in his head continued to grow until he was almost shaking with anger. Lloyd had enough of this and walked over to the bed, still filming the video, and kicked his lover away from his wife. Mary, seeing her husband, screamed. The man stood up, ready to fight, but when he saw the phone pointed at him, his face contorted with rage. Walking around the bed with his fists clenched to strike, Lloyd kicked him between the legs. He fell forward onto his face, groaning. Mary cried, looking at her husband. Lloyd turned to her. "What the hell, Mary?" Lloyd asked. While watching her, he uploaded all the photos and videos to the cloud. Then he cleaned the phone and put it in his pocket. "Don't come home. Your things will be on the lawn in the morning. You can take them then. After this, if you appear on my property, I will call the police." As Lloyd turned to leave, 2 police officers stood in the doorway, watching. "What's going on here?" asked one of them. "Nothing special, officer. I just caught my cheating wife with her lover." "What did you do with him?" "I pushed him away from my wife. He attacked me with his fists, and I hit him between the legs. You heard what I told my soon-to-be ex-wife. Don't leave until we hear their story." "How did you get into the room?" "Well, they decided to be smart and registered as Mr. and Mrs. Becker. I'm Mr. Becker, so the clerk was obligated to give me the key. Isn't it? I ended up renting a room," Lloyd said with a smile. The 2 policemen laughed as they entered the room. "Mrs. Becker, please get dressed," one of the policemen said. Mary was still crying, covered with the sheet. The other policeman was looking at the man on the floor. "He'll be fine, he's just knocked out," said the officer next to him. "Fine. Mrs. Becker, please go and get dressed," the officer told her again. "Can?" Lloyd asked as he collected Mary's clothes. The policeman nodded. Lloyd gathered her clothes and wrapped her in a sheet, helping her to the bathroom. The man Lloyd had hit began to rise to his feet. When he saw Lloyd, he roared, clenched his fists, and took a step towards him. One of the policemen stood in front of him. The man stopped, fury still on his face. "I want him arrested," he said, pointing at Lloyd. "Who are you?" asked the policeman. "You don't know who I am?" asked the man. Lloyd closed his eyes and shook his head. He hated people who thought they were so important that everyone had to know who they were. The policeman looked at him, grinning. "No, who are you?" "I'm the one who paid for this number," the man shouted. "Your name?" asked the policeman. "Harvey Burton," Harvey answered, puffing out his chest. "Why do you want him arrested, Mr. Burton?" asked the policeman. "He broke into my room and attacked me." "So you are registered in this number." Harvey's eyes widened, realizing that his name was not on the registration information. Never mind," he said. "Who is Harvey Burton?" Lloyd asked into the room. The 2 policemen laughed. "This is the guy I found with his wife in my room. Isn't this an attack, officers?" "This is true. So, Mr. Burton, what were you doing in Mr. Becker's room? And will Mr. and Mrs. Becker want to apply?" Harvey looked at Lloyd with hatred in his eyes. "Of course. Why not? I have a video of him doing this and then coming at me with his fists to beat me up. It's in the cloud. I can send it to any phone or computer IP address you say," Lloyd told police. At this point, Mary came out of the bathroom, still crying. She saw the look on Harvey's face and recoiled, sitting down on the bed. She must have already seen this look, and it was directed at her. "Did he hurt you?" Lloyd asked. "You don't have to answer," Harvey growled. "Shut up, Harvey," said the policeman closest to him. Harvey actually looked like he was going to attack the cop, but then changed his mind. "Mary," Lloyd asked. "I do not want to talk about it. Officers, you can release Mr. Burton if he promises never to approach my wife again." "Is this okay with you, Mrs. Becker?" asked the policeman. "I do not." Harvey growled again. "Fine. Let him be released." "Promise me you won't go near her again," the policeman said. "I won't come," Harvey replied. "Then I think I'll arrest you for assault." He didn't attack. "If he somehow forced you to have sex, that's a violation," the policeman said. Mary looked at Lloyd. He looked at her angrily. She looked at Harvey. He also looked at her with hatred. She looked back at her husband. "He's my boss," she told Lloyd quietly, with tears in her eyes. "Well, from now on you don't work for him anymore." "So what do you say?" said Lloyd. "I like my job, but I don't like that bastard," Mary said quietly to Lloyd. "Promise, or you'll go to jail for assault, Harvey," Lloyd said, anger in his voice. "And when you go to jail, I will send a video to your wife, bosses, and employees where you violate the company's rules on sexual harassment." Harvey growled again. The policeman next to him punched him in the stomach. Harvey fell face down on the ground again. "I'll take away your badge," he shouted to the policeman. "Bill, how many people have threatened us with this?" "I don't know, Sam. Maybe 1,000, maybe more," Bill said, grinning at Harvey. "But we're still here to arrest this freak, aren't we?" "This is true." The two policemen laughed. "Okay, I promise to never go near Mrs. Becker," Harvey croaked. "It's too late for that, Burton." "No, officers, please let him go." After all, he promised. Of course, if he breaks his promise, the videos and photos will end up on the corporate website. "How will you do this without breaking the law?" asked Bill. "This idiot's company hired my company to manage their corporate website. I have administrator rights on my work computer." Both police officers laughed again as they looked at Harvey. Harvey's face paled when he heard them laugh. He glared at Lloyd. "Get dressed, Harvey," one of the policemen said, throwing him some clothes. Mary was still sitting on the bed. Now she was looking at Harvey angrily. She flinched when he looked at her. "Look at my wife like that again, and you'll see what happens to the site," Lloyd growled. Harvey's eyes immediately focused on Lloyd and stayed there while he got dressed. After checking his pockets, he took a step towards Lloyd and Mary. One of the police stopped him by pressing a baton against his stomach. Harvey growled. Another policeman grabbed him by the collar and pulled him back a step, turning him towards the exit of the room. "Go away, Harvey," the policeman said. "Mr. Burton for you," Harvey growled. "Go away, or I'll arrest you anyway, you bastard." "Sorry, Mrs. Becker," the policeman said, turning to Mary. Mary nodded in apology. Harvey was roughly escorted out of the room. One of the policemen returned and stood in the doorway. "Will there be any problems between you?" he asked. "Not on my part, officer. I will never harm my wife, even for this. She may not come home for a while, but she will leave here without a single mark or bruise from me. I swear to God," Lloyd said. "No problem on my part either, officer," Mary answered. "Are you sure, Mrs. Becker?" asked the policeman. "Yes, I feel safe with my husband. Not so much with Harvey." "Fine. If there is another call from this number, we will arrest you both. Is it clear?" "No problem, officer," Lloyd said. Mary simply nodded, looking at her husband. "Should I leave the door open or close it?" asked the policeman. "Leave it open," Lloyd said. When the policeman left, Lloyd sat down next to Mary. "What did he threaten you with?" "My work. I liked my job. I loved it. I don't want to quit, but he'll probably fire me this evening. It would be better not to fire him. After what I wrote down, he would have been fired on the spot when his boss saw and heard what was happening here." Lloyd took out his phone and turned off the recording app. Mary's eyes widened and her face became a mask of fear. "If what you say is true, Mary, you have nothing to fear from me. If I find out that you lied about this, I will divorce you, but I will never physically harm you. Maybe later I'll come up with some kind of revenge. You should have come to me before the first time. I would protect you from him." "I would still have lost my job," she sobbed. "No, I wouldn't lose it. Harvey might have lost his, but you wouldn't have lost yours. Labor laws have changed a lot since the days when a boss could threaten a subordinate with a job if he didn't have sex with him." Also, if you had read your employment regulations, you would have learned that all you had to do was report it to the HR department. But we are the HR department, Mary said. He's not the head of the HR department, right? No, there is someone above him, but as far as I heard, he is just as bad. In fact, Harvey promised him he'd meet me the next time he was in town. Is it true? Okay. Is everything all right, Mr. Becker? The clerk looked through the door and winked at Lloyd. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks, Lloyd replied, laughing. We'll close the door when we leave or before we do anything else. The clerk walked away laughing. Mary looked at Lloyd in surprise. I still love you, Mary. I hope you still love me. Yes, more and more every minute, she answered. Will you ever forgive me? Don't know. I will try. I'll definitely try, Lloyd replied. Why don't we go home? I don't know if I can drive, and I really don't want to leave my car here. There's a bar across the road. Maybe you'd like something to drink? Lloyd asked. No, this can only worsen the situation. Just let me sit here for a while. Fine, if that's what you want, Lloyd replied. Give me a hug, Mary asked. Oh, well, It's okay, Mary said sadly. Thank you for your honesty. They sat on the bed, looking at the door, both wondering what would happen to their marriage after this nightmare. They were silent for about 5 minutes. Neither of them looked at the other. Slowly, Mary's hand reached towards Lloyd's. When she touched him, he didn't withdraw his hand, but he didn't make any move to take her hand either. She sighed, realizing that she could have ruined something great and hurt the person she loved more than anything in the world. I'm ready, she said quietly. Fine. I'll follow you, just in case. Fine, Lloyd asked. Of course, dear, Mary replied, taking her purse and heading towards the door. Lloyd followed her, closing the door as he left. The ride home took about 20 minutes and was smooth. Mary opened the garage door and parked in her spot. Lloyd followed her, parking in his spot. The door closed with the press of a button. Once inside the house, they both sat down at the kitchen table. It was still early, and neither of them wanted to go to bed. What will you do to me? Asked Mary. I do not know yet. I think we will both need some type of counseling to get through this. What do you think? I think yes. I hope I can find another job. I don't want to sit at home, becoming fat and lazy. That will never happen, darling. I know you. I don't know, since I've gotten old. You're not old, dear. You are a lively, beautiful woman who takes good care of herself. If that weren't the case, that idiot wouldn't be forcing you to have sex. Do you think he would do this to any of the women who let themselves go in your company? I think no. Can we not talk about him or what I did for now? Asked Mary. Certainly. Would you like a drink? Yes, please. Lloyd made them both a drink, and they sat talking. Not about anything important, but about everyday things that they always talked about at the end of the day. After finishing their drinks, they went to the bedroom. As Mary began to take off her clothes, Lloyd watched her. He told the truth that she was a beautiful, sexy woman. Even after 10 years of marriage, she was even more beautiful and sexy. When he saw the bruise on her shoulder, he growled and walked towards her. What? She asked. Who hit you on the back? He asked, turning her towards the mirror above the chest of drawers. Mary gasped when she saw a fist-sized bruise on her back. He did it? Lloyd asked loudly, almost shouting. Yes. Yes, I did. He loves to hit women. I do not know why. I don't care why, but he'll pay for this, Lloyd said, his voice choked and full of emotion. Taking out his phone, he took several photos of the bruise. Then he asked Mary to stand still while he examined her carefully. She had several other bruises, and Lloyd took pictures of them too. I'll see Mr. Burton on Monday, Lloyd said quietly, an angry glint in his eyes. Mary just sobbed as he gently touched the large bruise on her back. Sorry, Lloyd said. Everything is okay, dear. Let's go to sleep. We have a lot to do tomorrow. Of course, dear, Mary answered, climbing onto the bed naked. Lloyd raised his eyebrows, but said nothing. She usually slept in a nightgown. He also went to bed naked. He pulled the blanket over himself. Mary did the same. Not another word was said. The next morning, Lloyd called his lawyer, a friend from college who owed him a favor. He called him at home. It was Saturday. "Tim, this is Lloyd. How are you, buddy? How's Lily?" Lloyd asked. "Hello, Lloyd. It's okay. We're both okay. She's pregnant again. How are you?" "I'm fine, but it's been better. Glad to hear you are doing well. Are you excited to have another child, my friend?" "Yes, I'm very glad." "What happened, buddy?" Tim asked. Lloyd told him what happened. Tim said he was very sorry about it and that he would look into what Lloyd wanted to do. "I'll contact you tomorrow afternoon. I'm in court all Tuesday." "This is fine. One more question. If I submit my resignation in person, can they refuse to resign? And if you just don't show up to work anymore, what are the consequences?" "Labor law is what I know. If you have a statement, send a copy to me by certified mail or deliver it in person before giving it to your boss. Submit it to your immediate supervisor with a copy for his supervisor. If he refuses to accept it, send it to him by certified mail, return the receipt requested, even if he doesn't sign it. If they try to sue, which is quite possible, I will have a copy of the statement and the reason. If there is evidence, I will need it too." "Fine. I'll prepare everything this afternoon and bring it on Monday." "Great. Glad I can help you, Lloyd. I still owe you so much." "Tim, what I did because you were my friend. Send me an invoice for this." "Never. But if the case goes to court, I will work on a contingent basis." "Okay, buddy. I love you, but not like that," Lloyd said, laughing. Tim laughed in response. "I know, I love you too, but not like that. We'll talk tomorrow." They both hung up. Lloyd smiled. Tim was like a brother to him. At school, Tim was on the football team. Lloyd was in the computer club. Lloyd was considered the chief botanist. Tim was the popular jock that every girl wanted. One day, Lloyd was caught by one of the athletes while he was talking to a girl who was dating his friend. Tim intervened to prevent Lloyd from being beaten. Yes, it sounds like Lloyd owed Tim, but Tim was failing geometry. Lloyd asked what he could do to repay him. Tim asked him to be a math tutor until he graduated from high school. Lloyd happily took it on, and they became great friends. Tim was always there for Lloyd, and Lloyd was there for Tim. One day, Lloyd was walking home from school when there was a car accident on a nearby corner. Tim and his girlfriend Lily were in it. They were hit by a big truck, running a red light. Tim's car was trashed and overturned. Lloyd didn't hesitate to crawl over to the car to make sure his friend and Tim's girlfriend were okay. Being a botanist, he knew what to do and how to do it. Once he was sure they would be fine since they were both wearing seat belts, Lloyd pulled them both to safety before the car burst into flames. For this, Lily and Timothy wanted to help him in any situation. Lloyd blushed and said that they didn't have to do anything other than be his friends. They both agreed that he was already their friend and would remain so for life, and that they owed him their lives. Since then, they became best friends and spent a lot of time together. In fact, it was Lily who introduced Lloyd to Mary, for which he was grateful to her. Even now, he was still grateful to Lily and Tim and Mary. Sitting in front of the computer, he thought. Opening the document in a word processor, he began typing. When he finished, he printed out 5 copies. Smiling, he opened 5 envelopes. 4 of them had names and addresses. The 5th is just a name. He laid out the letters and waited for Mary to wake up. Mary woke up around 8 in the morning. She looked tired and depressed, but she still approached Lloyd with a hesitant smile. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Good morning," Lloyd replied, looking up from the computer. She sat down opposite him, and they looked at each other in silence for a while. Lloyd then handed her the letter. "What's this?" she asked, taking the envelope. "Read it," Lloyd answered briefly. Mary opened the envelope and began to read the letter. Her face changed as she read it. There were tears in her eyes when she finished. "This is a letter of resignation and an explanation of the reason. You must give it to your boss and a copy to his boss. If he refuses to accept it, send it by registered mail. Return the receipt requested. Tim, my lawyer, will have a copy in case they try to sue you, Lloyd explained. You did all this for me? Mary asked, wiping away her tears. Yes, we have to do this right to protect you from that bastard, Lloyd said. Mary leaned forward and hugged Lloyd. He hesitated for a moment, but then returned the hug. Thank you, Lloyd. I don't know how I can make up for this, but I'll try, she said, releasing him from her embrace. We'll have to get through this together, Lloyd replied. I've made an appointment for both of us next week. I think this will help us. Okay, Mary agreed. I will do everything to regain your trust. They sat in silence for a few more minutes. Lloyd then stood up and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Mary followed him. Lloyd was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and reading the morning paper, when Mary stumbled in to pour herself a cup of coffee. After she poured the coffee and made sure it had enough sugar and milk to suit her taste, she sat down across from Lloyd. Looking up from the newspaper, Lloyd smiled at her. Not his usual big morning smile, but it was still a smile. Nodding, Mary smiled back and carefully took a sip of coffee. Strong, said Mary. Lloyd chuckled, still smiling. You know I like my coffee strong, honey. I also like my woman to be strong, Lloyd said, frowning slightly. You need to be strong now. Mary nodded. She realized she wasn't strong when she allowed Harvey to force her to have sex with him. She has been a strong woman in HR throughout her career. She gave lectures on sexual harassment and fired employees. And now she was not only forced to have sex with her boss, but also allowed him to beat her. Her shoulder still hurt from the blow he had thrown at her for no reason. I know, honey. I also know that I failed at this, Mary said softly. You failed, but I hope we can get through this, Lloyd replied. Me too, darling. What are you planning for today? Mary asked. Well, first a shower. Then I have some paperwork for you to sign that I'll mail. Then I need to mow the lawn if it doesn't rain this afternoon. What did you have planned? Documents for me to sign? Yes, darling. Which? You will read them before you sign. I will make any changes you want before you sign them. But you need to think like an HR person and like a woman who was forced into sex and beaten by her boss. My resignation letter? Mary asked quietly. Yes, honey, but more like a report of what's going on at your company. One for Harvey, one for his boss, one for the CEO and president of the company, and one for my lawyer. All will be sent Monday morning, except the letter for Harvey. You will hand it over personally. Don't worry, I'll be there for you and Tim too. Mary looked at Lloyd. Tim was his best friend and lawyer. Lily, Tim's wife, introduced Mary to Lloyd. Lily was her best friend. She trembled with emotion. Are you sure you should go there? He might call security and they'll throw us out. You'll just have to hand him the letter in person. He'll get it in the mail later. Tim will be there as a representative of the court and my friend, to dispute anything Harvey says. He'll get the police report from last night. You told him. I had to, honey. He was furious about what Harvey did to you. He said he'd catch him in a dark alley and punch him in the face for us. I told him he couldn't do that and that I didn't want to. He'll go to jail. He'll sue Harvey and the company for what happened to you. You might have to testify in court if the company doesn't want to settle. Oh my God, sighed Mary. Okay, I guess. Mary, what Burton did to you is illegal and immoral. He needs to be seriously punished. The same goes for his boss, and the company needs to get rid of its incompetent executives. Mary sat thinking, looking at her husband. He didn't smile, but he wasn't angry with her either. She saw it in his eyes, which still looked at her with love and affection. They were clouded with hatred, but in her opinion, it was not hatred for her. I will do whatever you think is necessary, dear. I can always find a new job. I am very good at my profession, but without a recommendation. Don't worry about it. Tim will take care of that aspect of your departure from the company. Well, it looks like you're taking very good care of me, Mary said quietly. That's what I've always tried to do, my dear. I know. I was so focused on keeping my job. That bastard. Oh God, Mary said, sobbing. Lloyd moved over to her, hugging her. He was a little unsure, but his wife needed reassurance. He stroked her hair as he held her gently. Mary's arms rose to embrace him. She didn't squeeze him hard, just held him the way he held her. When Mary woke up on Monday morning, she was terribly afraid of what was about to happen that morning. After reading the letter, Mary signed each letter as Lloyd wrote. She thought it was very well written, to the point and almost elegant. She was very surprised by her husband's skills. In the shower, Mary stood under the hot water, letting it wash over her body, trying to relax before starting her tiring day. She was surprised when her husband joined her. He hugged her, pressing his body against her back. This morning, don't forget that I love you. You may hear things you don't like, but please remain silent unless asked to say something, Lloyd whispered in her ear. Suddenly, Mary became afraid. Closing her eyes, she nodded. I won't. I love you too. Lloyd kissed her neck, moved away from her, and began to wash himself. Mary stood watching him. She wondered how she could have given in to Harvey when she had a real man like Lloyd in her life. She really loved him. She couldn't say it enough times to make up for what she had allowed to happen to herself. Once they were done, they both stepped out of the shower and dried off. Mary went to the bathroom mirror to apply makeup and do her hair. Lloyd went into the bedroom to comb his hair and get dressed. Having finished, Mary went in to get dressed. Lloyd looked at his wife. Naked, she walked proudly to her closet. Lloyd sighed as he looked at her. She was a very beautiful woman. They met Tim in his office, which was close to Mary's work. Lily, his secretary, was also there. She and Mary hugged. Mary was worried that Lily was pregnant again. Mary smiled as they left Tim's office. At Mary's office, she checked Lloyd and Tim in at the counter in the building's lobby. Lloyd said he would not try to carry them out secretly. In the elevator, Tim said that he would speak. Mary nodded. Lloyd handed Mary her resignation letter. He also gave a copy to Tim. The rest are mailed. One to you, one to Harvey, one to his boss, and one to the CEO. All by certified mail with return receipt requested, Lloyd said. Tim opened his copy and read. He smiled when he finished. Very good. Who is the author? He asked. Lloyd, Mary answered. The doors opened and Mary led them to Harvey's office. His secretary looked up when she saw Mary. She sighed. He doesn't want to see you, Mary, Linda said. My name is Timothy J. Carson. I am Mrs. Becker's lawyer. I am here to see Mr. Burton. If he refuses, I will call him tomorrow. He will know why, Tim told Lind. He'll fire me if I come in and say you're here, Linda sobbed. Nodding, Tim walked around her desk and led Mary and Lloyd to Harvey's door. If you need to protect yourself from him, Tim began, taking out his business card and handing it to Linda. Call me. If you need to call security, will you please wait 10 minutes? Linda nodded as Tim opened the door to Harvey's office. Mr. Burton, I'm Mr. Carson. I'm a lawyer. We have business to discuss. Harvey's eyes widened, and then he glared at Tim. When Mary and Lloyd followed Tim in, Harvey growled. What are you doing here, you piece of shit? Harvey shouted. Tim towered over Harvey, who sat in his executive chair. Mr. Burton, if you continue to talk to me or my clients this way, I will be forced to sue you and your company, Tim said, looking down at Harvey. Okay, what do you want? Harvey growled. Mary stepped forward. Tim stopped her with his hand. Apologize to me and my clients, Tim said. Harvey glared at Tim. Lloyd mouthed the word website to Harvey. Good. Forgive the expression. And now, what do you want? Tim allowed Mary to step forward. She extended her hand towards Harvey. He looked at her like she was a piece of trash. Just place this on his desk, Mary. This, Mr. Burton, is her resignation letter. A copy has been sent to your boss and the CEO of this company. You will also receive a copy by certified mail. I do not accept her dismissal. She still works for me, and I will deal with her disobedience. From that moment on, as witnessed by me and her husband, she resigned. In this state, She has the right to resign at any time for any reason she sees fit. You cannot stop her. You should read this letter. I am sure that senior management, even if they are assholes as you, will want to cover their asses in this matter. I will file criminal and civil lawsuits against you and against your boss, his boss all the way up to the top of the company, and also against the board of directors. I assume, like any corporation, shit goes downhill. Harvey sat with his mouth open, his face full of rage, but he made no movement. Two guards entered the office. They walked over to Harvey's desk. "Is everything all right, Mr. Burton?" asked one of them. "No," Harvey said. "Get these people out of my office. Now." "We're leaving now, gentlemen," Tim said, turning towards the door. "But we will stop at Mrs. Becker's desk to collect her personal belongings." "No, don't stop," Harvey shouted. "Of course, sir. Mr. Burton, what were you told?" asked the guard with 3 stripes on his sleeve. "I will get you fired," Harvey shouted. "We don't work for you, Mr. Burton. We don't even work for your company. Now shut up." All 5 walked out of Harvey's office. Harvey cursed and yelled at them as they walked towards Mary's table. Linda has already prepared a box for her. "Can I talk to you, Mr. Carson?" Linda asked. "Of course. Here or in my office?" Tim asked. "Is 11 in the morning in your office okay?" "Yes. I'm free all day. I'll put you on my calendar." "Thank you. Do you mind if I pass your card on to others?" "Of course not." "Thank you. Mary, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault, Linda," Mary replied. "Did he blackmail you too?" "I don't know if I should answer that," Linda said. "Not now," Tim said. Linda returned to her desk. "You should keep an eye on her. Harvey might get back at her for letting us through," Tim told the guards. They looked at each other. The senior guard followed Linda. Mary finished packing her things. "Can I trust you 3 to leave when she says goodbye to her friends?" asked the guard, turning to Mary. "You can, Matt. We're all law-abiding citizens, unlike Harvey Burton," Mary said quietly. "Okay, Jerry might need some help with that bastard Harvey after one of his girls quit." "I might need to talk to you in the future too, sir," Tim said, handing his card to the guard. "And I have a lot to say about this piece of crap," Matt said. "Jerry too. I'll call you." "When?" "This afternoon will be convenient. We can arrange something at my office. It's not far from here," Tim told Matt. "Mary, it's been a pleasure working with you. This woman, well, never mind. She's been a mainstay here until recently," Matt said. Mary blushed. Matt left. Mary led her husband and Tim around the department, saying goodbye to colleagues and friends. When they finally made it to the elevator, they met Matt and Jerry. All 5 entered the elevator. Before the doors closed, a hand entered the gap, causing the doors to open. Harvey stood in front of them, his face full of rage. Matt and Jerry immediately stood in front of him. As Harvey lunged for the door, Matt punched him in the face hard. Harvey's legs flew up, and he fell onto his back as the doors began to close again. Matt shook his fist as he walked out, causing the doors to open again. Jerry stepped out of the cab to help Matt pull Harvey aside. "That man has a lot of uncontrollable rage." "How often has he hit you, dear?" Lloyd asked as the doors began to close again. "He didn't hit me that often, and I don't know why I put up with it. He was a pig. I wish I could kick him once," Mary said. Lloyd winced at the analogy Mary used when describing what she wanted to do to Harvey. Mary gasped, looking at her husband. "I'm sorry, darling," she said softly, covering her mouth with her hand. "It's okay, honey. I know you didn't mean me." Then there was a loud knock on the door. Lloyd knew immediately who it was. Mary gasped, also knowing who it was. Lloyd put a finger to his lips. Mary nodded. Lloyd walked over to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out his 1911. Mary's eyes widened when she saw him walking towards her. "Go open the door." "Step back quickly," Lloyd whispered. Mary nodded. Lloyd stood behind the door so he couldn't be seen. He stood there, gun at the ready, and nodded to Mary. She opened the door and stepped back into the living room as Harvey burst inside. Lloyd came out from behind the door and stood behind him. Harvey didn't even notice Lloyd. "You fucking bitch." "Fuck you, Harvey," Mary screamed. "Damn you, don't you dare talk to me like that," he shouted, raising his hand to hit her. Lloyd put the muzzle of the gun to Harvey's head and cocked the hammer. "Touch her and you're dead," said Lloyd. Harvey froze in place. The hand is raised, the mouth is open, the eyes are widened in horror. "What, you didn't expect my husband to be home?" said Mary, laughing. Lloyd took a step back, anticipating Harvey's next move as he quickly turned to grab Lloyd and the gun. Lloyd hit him in the face with the butt of his pistol. Harvey collapsed to the floor. "Mary, go call the police. Tell them there's an intruder in our house that I'm holding at gunpoint." Mary nodded and ran to get the phone in the kitchen. Harvey just glared at Lloyd. "You don't dare shoot me. You don't want to go to jail," Harvey growled. "If you think so, try to move even a little and you will lose your right arm." "They want me to stay on the line," Mary shouted from the kitchen. "It's okay, honey. We're having a great time here." "Harvey is learning the basics of self-defense," Lloyd said loudly, still aiming and keeping a close eye on Harvey. Sirens could be heard from afar. As they approached, Harvey looked increasingly worried. "So you don't want to settle this like a man," he growled. "Well, since there's one piece of shit on my floor, and I'm the only man here, that's going to be hard to do, dumbass." Lloyd and Harvey both heard Mary chuckle from the kitchen. Harvey growled angrily, but didn't move. The sirens stopped about a block from their home. Lloyd heard at least 2 patrol cars approach the house. He was waiting for a command from the police. "Put down your weapon, sir," a voice came from the open door behind him. Lloyd raised his hands, moving the gun from his right hand to his left. He took it by the barrel and, slowly turning, placed the pistol on the table in front of the window behind him. As soon as he put the gun down, Harvey quickly stood up and attacked him. But he never struck, as 2 policemen instantly pulled him away. Lloyd remained on the floor until he received instructions from the police. Mary stood in the kitchen doorway with the phone in her hand. She gasped as Harvey attacked Lloyd, but she breathed a sigh of relief when the police pulled him away from her husband. Harvey lay face down, screaming and claiming that Lloyd had broken into his house and grabbed his gun. The police told him to shut up. One even kicked him in the side to shut him up. "You can stand up, Mr. Becker," one of the policemen said. Harvey groaned as he heard the cop call Lloyd's name. Lloyd smiled as he stood up slowly. It was Matt from last night. Mary was now next to her husband. She looked down at Harvey, who was struggling with the police handcuffs. "Do you want to press charges, Mr. Becker?" Matt asked as he held Harvey. "I think we can't. After all, Mary opened the door. He came in uninvited and tried to attack me." "What do you think, officer?" Lloyd asked. "Trespassing is a possible charge, sir," Matt said. "Here's your answer. He didn't have my permission to enter my house." "Mary," called Harvey. "What?" Mary screamed. "Help me." "Fuck you," Mary growled, stepping towards him. "I will charge him with assault." "Mary," Lloyd said quietly. "He broke his promise, didn't he?" "I suppose so, officer." "I'll call a detective. She'll be here right away. If you have evidence, keep it handy," Matt said, leading a sobbing Harvey out to his car. "Are you sure about this, dear?" Lloyd asked. "Now I'm sure. And you? After all, I was the victim. I want to kill this bastard for what he did to you, but then I'll be locked up and I'll never see you again." Mary hugged Lloyd, sobbing. "I don't want to lose you. I love you so much," Mary cried. "I'm glad you held back for me." The detective arrived within an hour. It took her 3 hours to gather all the evidence and write down their testimony. She was very nice and understood what Mary was going through and how Lloyd felt. She also referred them to a psychologist. After everyone left, Lloyd took Mary to the bedroom. "You should rest, dear," Lloyd said. "I can see that this has been hard for you." "Yeah, I think I will. Thank you, honey. You've been so good to me through all of this. I don't know." Mary started to cry. Lloyd hugged her. Mary, trembling with emotion, hugged her husband tightly. Lloyd kissed her on the cheek. Mary sobbed, looking into Lloyd's eyes. Once everyone was notified, Tim called Lloyd and Mary. He made an appointment in his office for all the lawyers. He filed a $20 million lawsuit against the company for failing to supervise their executives in the case of sexual harassment allegations. He sued each of the executives for $10 million. The conference room was crowded. Tim stood looking at each lawyer. The company engaged 6 lawyers. Each manager had his own lawyer. "You 6 decide who will speak, the rest leave," Tim said. Everyone sat and looked at him. No one moved to leave. "Okay, you can all leave. I'll see you in court," Tim said as he turned and walked out the door. There was a noise in the room. After a few seconds, 5 people came out. One of them approached Tim. They spoke. Tim nodded. "Mary, Lloyd, join me," Tim said as he walked back into the conference room. All 3 sat at the head of the table. "Gentlemen, my clients will participate in this discussion. If you don't like it, you can leave. They were not involved in determining the amounts I asked for. They have evidence that you can see here in my office. If we go to court, they will become public knowledge. If they leave this office, they will become public knowledge. If we reach an agreement today, there will be no further action and all evidence will remain confidential. I will now accept proposals to resolve the dispute. First from each manager, then from the company. The first one will be Mr. Burton's lawyer," Tim said. "My client is willing to offer $1 million if your clients drop the assault charges." Tim looked at Mary and Lloyd. "We need to discuss this among ourselves," Lloyd said. Mary nodded. "Let's get back to this. Mr. Jackson, our offer is $250,000. Tim pressed play on the tape recorder in front of him. "And he promised a date with me to his boss, Mr. Jackson, when he was in town." "I don't think so. How many other women have sued him?" Tim asked. "Okay, $500,000. He can't offer more." "It's worth a lot more. His house itself is worth $25 million, Tim said. "Do you want him to sell his house?" "No, I want my clients to be compensated not only for their losses, but also for the pain and suffering caused by not following your company's rules and regulations." Lloyd sat and looked at his friend. Until now, he hadn't realized how good Tim was at his job. $1 million, like Burton, Jackson's lawyer gave up. "Acknowledged," Lloyd said. Mary nodded. She decided, without consulting her husband, that she would let him make decisions about the settlement amounts. She also decided that she would let him keep all the money for himself. "Mr. Nelson?" Tim asked. $1 million. "No," Lloyd said. Nelson was the CEO and president and should have known what was going on in his company. $3 million, suggested the lawyer. "Acknowledged," Lloyd said, and Mary nodded next to him. "Board of directors," Tim asked. "They believe they are not responsible for these actions." "They didn't appoint Mr. Nelson," Tim asked. "Assigned." "Isn't he accountable to the board?" "Yes." "Has he ever informed the board that this is happening at his company and that he is looking into the matter?" Tim asked. "No." I quote from the minutes of the meeting of the board of directors on October 24th of this year. "It has become known to me that some managers in the Human Resources Department are abusing." $4 million, said the lawyer. "Acknowledged," Lloyd said. "Now it's $8 million. "Company?" Tim asked. $9 million, said the lawyer. Tim looked at Lloyd. Lloyd looked at Mary. She shrugged. 12, Lloyd said. Tim chuckled. "I agree," said the lawyer. "I expect checks from those whose offers have been accepted by the end of the day. There are acceptance letters for each of you that you must sign before leaving. My secretary will be with you shortly. Mr. Burton's lawyer and Mr. and Mrs. Becker, please come to my office," Tim said. The 4 stood up and left the conference room. Lily waited outside and hugged Mary before entering the office with letters for each lawyer. Lloyd and Mary followed Tim, Burton's lawyer following behind them. When they entered the office, Tim closed the door and sat down at his desk. "Now, Lloyd, Mary, what do you think of the proposal?" Tim asked. The offer from him suits us. It's a condition we have a problem with, Lloyd said. But he didn't attack her. He forced her to have sex with him under threat of dismissal. It's illegal in this state. He also physically beat her, Tim almost shouted to the lawyer. I assume you also consider women second-class citizens, like Harvey Burton. This stunned the lawyer. He looked at Tim angrily. How dare you, Tim shouted. Lloyd, don't. Lloyd had already risen from his chair when Tim called out to him. Lloyd sat back down, his eyes blazing with hatred. What's your offer without conditions? I don't have a suggestion then. Then I'll see you in court. Are you representing Burton in his criminal case? No. Let me make a phone call. Nothing less than $2 million now, Lloyd told the lawyer gloomily. Tim just looked at him calmly. The lawyer nodded, getting up, and left the office, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket. Tim smiled at Lloyd. You'd be a great negotiator, my friend. No, I wouldn't. In fact, I'd take nothing if I could just beat up Harvey Burton, Lloyd said quietly. Me too, Mary interjected. And I want him to go to jail where someone will make him their bitch, and he will know what it's like to be humiliated. Tim looked at Mary in surprise. He grinned, as did Lloyd. The three sat in silence for a long time. When the door opened, no one moved or said a word. $2 million, no conditions, said the lawyer without even sitting down. Lloyd nodded, as did Mary. Tim gave him a letter accepting the offer. He then gave Lloyd and Mary a letter confirming their acceptance of all proposals specified in a separate letter that would be sent to all parties by the end of the business day. I'll hand over the check by the end of the day, Burton's lawyer said as he handed Tim the letter of acceptance. Tim nodded, accepting the letter. The lawyer turned and left the office. How much do you need, Tim? Lloyd asked. My usual third. Nothing more than that. Consider it an early birth gift from Mary and me. We can't, Lloyd. Really, after what you did for us? No. Okay, how many kids do you have to send to college? Mary asked. You know the answer, Tim replied. Then take $1 million for each child, said Mary. Lloyd smiled at his wife. Tim and Lily will have 3 children when Lily gives birth to the one she is currently carrying. $3 million would be more than enough to provide them and any other children with an education. This also left Lloyd and Mary with $11 million tax-free. They are now secured for life. Tim picked up the phone and pressed the button. He said 2 words, then hung up. Lily came in. Sit down, honey. Mary wants to tell you something, Tim said to his wife. Lily sat next to Mary, looking at her. Don't worry, honey. It's nothing terrible. I want you and Tim to accept $1 million from Lloyd and I for each child's education. Lily screamed, then hugged Mary and cried. Tim smiled at his wife. Lloyd smiled at his friend. Mary told him about Lily's concerns about paying for their children's college education. He was glad that he and Mary were able to help. You saved my life again, Tim said, looking at Lloyd. Not me, Mary. She's the one who suffered at the hands of that scoundrel. When you're right, you're right. Tim stood up and hugged Mary. She gasped, then sighed. Lily kissed Lloyd's face and smothered him with her hugs. All 4 stood hugging each other for a long time. By 5 p.m., there were 5 cash receipts on Tim's desk. He breathed a sigh of relief as he put them in his pocket. He was going to dinner with Lloyd and Mary and Lily. He left the office a happy man. He now had enough capital to hire someone to replace Lily in the office while she raised their children. And his friend is now secured for life with his wonderful and beautiful wife. Life was good for the next 5 years. Lloyd and Mary were happy and in love. They visited places they had never dreamed of before. They eventually settled back in their home in Austin. They both talked a lot about what they wanted to do, but they seemed to get bored of traveling and staying in hotels, even if they were 5-star hotels. They loved their home. They loved living in Austin. They missed their friends and families. Soon they both got jobs. Not for the money, but to have something to do. Lloyd found a position at his old company. He said he wouldn't travel and wanted at least 5 weeks of vacation a year. He was ready to work for pennies, and they agreed. Mary found a job with a small recruiting firm. She demanded the same conditions as Lloyd, and they were granted to her. When you're willing to work for half the rate, why wouldn't they agree? For the next 2 years, Lloyd and Mary were happy. They both returned home at the same time in the evening. They enjoyed each other's company and began talking about family. But then Mary began to stay late at work or be unavailable at times during the day. She also started acting differently around Lloyd. She was either aloof or very affectionate. Lloyd began to worry again that she was cheating on him. He still had the equipment he used the last time she cheated on him. He put in fresh batteries and reinstalled it. He also downloaded tracking and recording apps onto Mary's phone. He even installed cameras in the bedrooms, in the main and guest rooms, also in the living room and kitchen. He was pretty sure she never brought anyone home, but sometimes he noticed that the sheets were changed when he returned from work. 2 days later, his equipment allowed him to watch Mary return home during her lunch break. This time, he had a live video stream from all listening and video devices. He was sitting at work, watching the cameras at home, and saw Mary and the young man walk through the door. As soon as the door closed, they began to kiss passionately. Mary's clothes seemed to evaporate from her body. She fell straight to the floor and almost tore the guy's clothes off. He thought he would stop it right now. He dialed Mary's number on his mobile phone. He heard the bell. Mary gasped when she saw that he was calling. She didn't hesitate to answer. Still caressing her lover, she motioned for him to be quiet and answered the call. "Hi, darling. What a pleasant surprise," she said in a sweet voice. "Hello, Mary. Is this dignity pleasant in your hand?" Lloyd asked. "What are you talking about, dear?" Lloyd could see the fear on her face. She let her lover go. "About your lover who is right in front of you." Mary gasped, looking around. She never noticed the camera. "Are you following me?" she asked nervously. "Yes. Now here's what you do. You're going to pack your things and get the hell out of my house. Oh, and take your young stud with you, you cheater." "I can explain." "No doubt, but it won't change anything. I'll call Tim as soon as we finish talking." "No, no, I love you." Silence greeted him. Mary just looked at the floor. The guy she was with reached out to comfort her, but she brushed him off. "I was just getting revenge for what you're doing, you two-faced bastard," Mary screamed. Lloyd swallowed. She knew. "What are you talking about?" he shouted. "Vanessa, Carla, Katie, and Star. Is Star her real name or her stage name?" asked Mary. "The bitch is a dancer, Lloyd. Seriously? I still don't understand what you're talking about." "Lie to me again, and we'll break up, and I'll take every cent you have," Mary said. "I'm driving home. We'll talk when I arrive." "Talking on the phone is not a good idea," Lloyd said. "Why?" "Because you are recording our conversation," Mary growled. "I'm going. Remove your stallion before I arrive." "Nonsense. If the door is locked, you will wait for me to open it. I'll have this guy, and it could take hours," Mary said. "Oh, by the way, I not only have pictures of you with them, but also a video." Mary passed out. Lloyd watched as Mary got dressed. Lloyd guessed she wasn't in the mood to have her toy anymore. She shouted at him to get dressed. He asked how he would return to work. Mary told him to call a taxi. Mary sat on the sofa, waiting for Lloyd to arrive. Mary was still sitting on the couch when Lloyd walked through the door. He frowned, shook his head, and sat down next to Mary. "Why, Lloyd? Why?" she asked, crying. "How could you do this to me?" Lloyd rubbed his face with his hands. He could not look at his wife for fear of losing her. "I have no excuse, and I will not try to justify myself with the cliches that everyone usually uses. I just wanted to find out some things. I stopped seeing them a few months ago." "I know, and what I did was revenge. At first I thought that you might be taking revenge for what happened to me, but then I wondered why." "No, I didn't do it, I promise. When I found out what really happened to you, well, how could I, as a loving husband, do this after what you went through? No, I love you too much to do that. I don't know why I did what I did. This will sound corny, but it just happened. I didn't like them, hell. I didn't even like one of them. Who was first? Mary asked softly. Lloyd thought that if he confessed, they could get through this together. Katie, we worked together. She was married to the animal and in the process of divorcing him. We were just talking one evening in my office, and suddenly we started kissing, or rather she started kissing me, and I just kissed her back for no reason. One thing led to another, and the next day we ended up at a motel near work. Thank you for admitting it. How much did you have? Lloyd asked quietly. Before you caught me, 25. Lloyd's eyes went wide, his mouth dropped open, and he just stared at his wife. I will divorce you, Lloyd. In fact, the documents are already on their way. And Jimmy found your server and is destroying it right now. So you won't have proof of my infidelity, but I have enough to bury you. Lloyd sighed. So what do you want? All. House, cars, money, and even more revenge. I will have even more men in our beds for the next year, until our divorce is finalized. Lloyd nodded. Why so vindictive? He asked. What happened to me was not of my own free will in the truest sense of the word, and then what you did was a repeated disappointment for me. That's how I felt when I found out about your cheating. How many more were there besides these 4? Only these 4. How did you meet them? Lloyd stopped looking around, remembering the cameras. Then he got up and went into the office. Sitting down at the computer, he entered the website that was recording cameras. He copied everything to another server, then deleted it from the one Jimmy supposedly destroyed. You lying bitch, he shouted. Mary ran into the office, eyes wide open. When she saw what Lloyd was doing, she screamed. Crap, that little scoundrel didn't do what I told him. Maybe you should have fucked him before he left, Lloyd said, laughing. Crap. That's right, no confessions for you. But I have notes, and I will edit them carefully. Lloyd knew that he could talk in the office. There was no camera or listening device. Crap. So it was money? Lloyd asked. Mary froze. She looked at Lloyd. He saw pure hatred in her eyes. So tell me the truth. Did Harvey really force you to have sex with him? Mary almost climbed over the table to get to Lloyd. She was angrier than he had ever seen her. The hatred in her eyes was alarming. He grabbed her wrists and held her there while she knelt on the table. Standing up, he turned her onto her back and crossed her arms at her neck. Answer me, he shouted. No, she screamed. I loved what he did to me, you damn coward. Nodding, Lloyd released her and quickly walked towards the door. So you and he continued to have sex. He made love to me. He is kind and gentle to me. I love him and he loves me, she shouted, sitting on the edge of the table. She jumped off and walked towards Lloyd. Lloyd stood smiling at her. Yes, I thought so from the beginning, but I gave you the benefit of the doubt. You two conspired to get this money, right? Lloyd asked. Yes, and then you gave half to that damn friend. He was entitled to a third, and it was you who gave them the other 3 million. I'll tear it off between your legs for this, Mary shouted. Lloyd walked towards the door. As he was leaving, his sixth sense alerted him, and he ducked down. The bat that Harvey swung at him whizzed over his head and hit Mary in the face at the same time as the doorframe. Lloyd punched Harvey in the stomach as hard as he could. Harvey dropped his bat and fell face down. Mary was also unconscious. Lloyd punched Harvey in the stomach hard. Harvey was incapacitated, as was Mary. Lloyd called the police. While he waited, he downloaded the video from the living room camera onto his phone. As he watched it, he saw Harvey sneak into the house from the garage with a bat in his hands. He stood waiting in the doorway of the office. Lloyd smiled. Turning on the editing app, he cut off the beginning and saved the end, where Harvey tried to attack him and ended up hitting Mary. Lloyd approached Mary so that when the police arrived, they would think he was a loving husband who was trying to protect her from the man who attacked her again. The police have arrived. 2. Lloyd smiled. Matt was one of them. He simply shook his head. Again, said Matt. Lloyd simply nodded as he held Mary. The ambulance has arrived. Lloyd went with Mary to the hospital. He simply shook his head. At the hospital, a detective arrived to question Lloyd and Mary. Mary was still unconscious and unable to speak, so Lloyd told them everything and showed them the video. The detective wanted to take Lloyd's phone. No, you won't take my phone. I'll send it to you. Email or SMS. Email. Although I may confiscate this phone as evidence. And before you can swipe, he'll be dead. The detective gave Lloyd his email address. Lloyd sent it right there in front of him. When he received the receipt notification, he nodded as he opened it. After looking at everything, he left. Mary woke up a little later. Where am I? What did you do to me? She croaked. Are you in the hospital? I didn't do anything to you. It's all Harvey. He wouldn't, said Mary. My face hurts. Yes, it should. Harvey hit you in the face with a bat. He's going back to prison for assault, burglary, trespassing, and a host of other crimes. He won't be released for a very long time. How did you do this, bastard? Mary wheezed. I didn't arrange it. You did it yourself. I saw Harvey walking down the street like an idiot when I arrived home. Now I will be divorcing you and suing him for a lot of things. I also suspect that you and him will be arrested for fraud, since the lawsuit against the company and all the executives was fraudulent. I called Tim, and he is filing lawsuits on my behalf and on behalf of the companies against you and Harvey. I hope you two enjoy life in prison. Unfortunately, you will not be together. You were part of the scam too, Mary gasped. Not really. My name did not appear on any of the documents. It wasn't on the checks, and I made sure everything was in your name at your bank. Every cent spent was from your checks or your credit cards. My name appeared only in hotel and airline registers as your husband. You paid for everything. Even $3 million for Tim and his children, which somehow disappeared from his bank account. Imagine the shock of finding them in your home. The fees he received were legitimately his, but he will return them due to the fraudulent manner in which they were earned. Tim is an honest man, and successfully enough to allow yourself to get them back with my help. You son of a bitch, Mary croaked. My mother was married when I was born, but it looks like I married a bitch. I hope you have a wonderful life. Oh, they sent me papers from your lawyer, but I don't think he'll be with you long since you don't have the money to pay him, and I don't either. So, see you. Oh no, not see you. Here comes the detective again. What story will you tell him this time? Damn bastard, Mary croaked, holding her throat. Thus ended Lloyd's marriage. Tim filed for divorce without compensation. The marriage was consummated quickly, as Mary and Lloyd had no assets to speak of, and she would spend the next few years in prison. Harvey, as the think tank, received another 15 years in prison on top of his sentence for an attack that he was actually innocent of, but he had no one fighting for his release in the case. Total time in prison he will have is 20 years. Lloyd felt no pity for him. He deserved it for inducing Lloyd's wife into adultery and fraud. He deserved to die. Lloyd lost his house, car, and job. Somehow, the evidence Mary collected about his infidelities ended up in emails to his boss. He was immediately fired due to some minor company rule. His house was confiscated and his car was taken away. He was broke and homeless for some time. Tim and Lily took him in, but he didn't want to be a burden to them and quickly found work as a bartender and rented a room in a cheap hotel in a very bad part of the city. But he was happy, as happy as he can be in his position. Lloyd sat in the diner after the detectives left, trying to finish his breakfast. Lloyd suspected he knew who attacked Katie. It had been a long time since he had seen her. A lot of time, and he was notified that Mary had been released from prison. Could she really hold a grudge for so long? Lloyd didn't think so, but who knows? He called Tim and asked him to check to see if Harvey had been released. Leaving the diner, Lloyd called a taxi and went to St. James's Hospital to visit Katie. He needed to see this through. He needed to find out if Mary and Harvey were after the other women he was with while Mary was still cheating on him with Harvey. Arriving at the hospital, Lloyd asked where Katie was. He was shown to the fifth floor, room 5567. When he arrived, Katie was alone, her eyes closed. Lloyd stood in the doorway and cleared his throat. Katie's eyes opened. She narrowed her eyes when she saw him. Recognizing him, she smiled, then quickly looked around the room. Lloyd smiled at her, remembering that she was married. He hurried to her and took her hand. "I wouldn't ruin anything for you, darling. We're just old colleagues, and I heard you got hurt," Lloyd whispered. Katie smiled and nodded at him, expressing relief. "Are you okay?" Lloyd asked with a concerned look on his face. "Yes, thank you for coming. There's something I didn't tell the police because of you. The two mentioned your name. The man who attacked me was called Lloyd by the woman who was with him." "What did he call her?" Lloyd asked. "Mary. Is that your wife's name?" "Ex-wife. We divorced 3 years ago. More than 3 years ago." "I didn't know." They continued to talk about her life and Lloyd's life since he became a bachelor. She was still married. She and her husband mended their relationship and were happy again. Her husband has undergone anger counseling. Lloyd was quite happy with his single life. It was a long time after the visiting hours had ended when Detective Holbrook entered the room. "We're looking for you," she told Lloyd. "Why?" he asked. "There was another attack. Carla Gomez. She's in the room down the hall. She said you were there," Holbrook said. "He's been here all afternoon and evening, Detective. You can check with the nurses," Katie said. "Carla also said that my ex-wife was there too?" Lloyd asked. "Actually, that's what she said. How did you find out?" Holbrook asked. "I told her," Katie said, looking at Holbrook defiantly. "It's clear. The woman called the man Lloyd, and the man called her Mary?" "Yes, I knew it wasn't Lloyd, so I didn't say anything." "Carla also says it wasn't him," Holbrook said. "And if he was here almost all day, then it couldn't be him." "You might want to check where Harvey Burton is," Lloyd said. "Your wife's lover?" Holbrook asked. "Yes." "He's still in prison. Is there anyone else you can think of?" "Well, Mary sure is. And the man." Lloyd pulled a piece of paper from his wallet and handed it to the detective. "You could start with these guys. These are the ones she cheated on me with while we were still married. My lawyer has pictures of them if you need them," Lloyd said, handing Tim's card to Holbrook. How did you get this information?" she asked. "I suspected her of cheating for a lot longer than she thought. My friend, a private detective, found out who exactly." "It's clear." "You would make a good cop," Holbrook said. "No thanks. I value my skin too much," Lloyd said with a chuckle. "Don't leave until we're done here. I'd like to talk to you more about your wife and where she might be." "Sure, I'll be here or in Carla's room if that's no problem." "No problem. She looks like she needs some support. She doesn't have anyone to come." Lloyd looked at Katie. She nodded. As he left the room with the detective, a man approached them. "Did you find out who did this to my wife?" he asked Holbrook, looking Lloyd up and down. "No, it's not who we thought. He had an ironclad alibi for both attacks." "Was there another one?" he asked. "Yes, she's in this room," Holbrook said, pointing to the room they were standing in front of. "Thank you," Katie's husband said as he walked into her room. "Let me know when you find who is with Mary," Lloyd asked. "Necessarily. See you later." Lloyd watched as Detective Holbrook walked away. He thought she was quite pretty, although a little rough around the edges. Shaking his head, he looked into Carla's room. She was talking to the nurse. Lloyd waited. When the nurse left, he came in. Carla looked at him and smiled. "Lloyd," she said quietly, "I heard you were alone and thought I'd come keep you company, if that's okay." "Yes, oh yes, come, hug me." "I need your hug," Carla said, starting to cry. Lloyd hurried over to her, leaned down, and gently hugged her. She hugged him tightly. "I've missed you so much since my husband divorced me." Lloyd kissed her cheek, carefully pulling away. Looking into her eyes, he saw loneliness and other emotions. "I was so sorry to hear about this. I wanted to contact you, but I was going through problems in my marriage. But now I'm here, and I'm so sorry you went through this. If you need anything, let me know. Now let's talk about something else, okay? Right now, I just want you close. I know it wasn't you. The voice wasn't like that. Did you tell the detective that? Lloyd smiled. Oh, did I do the right thing? Carla asked, looking very worried. Yes, you did the right thing, honey. You are a wonderful woman. I adore you. When you get out of here, we'll have lunch or something. Fine. I would really like to, Lloyd. True, I would really like this. Me too, said. Lloyd smiles at Carla. Mr. Becker, may I interrupt you? Detective Holbrook said as she stood in the doorway. Go, Carla said. See you later. Of course, Lloyd replied. Lloyd leaned down and kissed her forehead, then turned and left the room. Holbrook was waiting outside. Let's find a place to sit, she said. Not far down the corridor, there was a small corner with a sofa and a table. They sat down on the sofa. Lloyd looked at Holbrook. 2 days, 2 attacks. We believe they will attack again tomorrow night. I was hoping that we could somehow get ahead of this, Holbrook said. Who's the next woman on your list? And were these 2 in any order? Lloyd sat there, looking stunned. Of course, he almost shouted. Vanessa. Vanessa Perkins. Holbrook nodded and Lloyd gave her Vanessa's address and phone number. I will send people to her immediately. Who will come after her? Old. Sorry, that's the only name I have. She was a dancer at the Midnight Club on. I know where it is. We will send people there too. This should help. Now I have a question for you, Holbrook said. Of course, ask. I was going to say shoot, but... Holbrook laughed nervously. It's funny now, she said. Yes, I've heard that before, but not in this context. Thank you. This makes things a little easier. Would you like to grab a drink sometime? Certainly. I'd love to, but only if you tell me your name, Lloyd said, raising his eyebrows. Oops, I thought I gave you my card. Oops, I didn't even look at her, sorry. Laura Jane Holbrook. I'm single, never been married, born and raised in Austin. Thank you, Laura. Very beautiful name. When? Lloyd asked. Oh, I'm off duty in an hour, I thought. Of course, where? I'll be here until the end of my shift. I'll come up for you. This is fine? Laura asked. Of course, since I don't have a car. Great. See you in an hour. I'll be in Carla's or Katie's room. I feel so sorry for them, Lloyd said. Me too. Laura stood up and looked at Lloyd, winked and walked away. Lloyd looked after her. She had a beautiful figure, a pretty face, and she was smart. He started to like her at the diner. It's a pity that the circumstances of their meeting were so terrible. Lloyd went back to Carla's room. He checked on Katie first, but her husband was there, so he didn't go in. Carla was glad to see him, even if she was half asleep. Just sitting with her, holding her hand, calmed her down. An hour later, Laura Holbrook looked in the door. Lloyd looked at her and smiled. He raised a finger. Laura nodded. Carla was just falling asleep. Carla, I have to go. I'll be back tomorrow to help you get home, okay? I would really like that. Thank you for sitting with me. You're welcome, honey, Lloyd said, kissing her forehead. Carla smiled at him as he stepped away from her. Laura was waiting in the corridor. Smiling, she motioned for him to follow her. Lloyd walked next to Laura. They talked about how both women were doing. Why did your wife do this? Laura asked when they got into the car. Once they were inside and the door closed, Lloyd turned to her. Why? Well, she and Harvey wanted money from the lawsuit, and I took that opportunity away from them. I think they thought that if everyone thought I was attacking these women, they would take revenge by putting me in jail. How did Harvey get out? He asked. For good behavior. His sentence was reduced so that he could be paroled after 3 years for good behavior. He hasn't checked in with his parole officer in 2 weeks. He has violated the terms and will return to prison to serve the full sentence plus 5 years. Well then, they are the ones doing it. I hope you catch them before they hurt anyone else. I hope so too. Listen, is there anyone else they can hunt? No. Oh, wait. Harvey's wife, Lloyd almost shouted. Laura took the microphone off the dashboard and began calling out letters and numbers. She pressed the switch and the siren and flashing lights turned on. Putting down the microphone, she pressed the gas. Lloyd started squealing and laughing. He knew where they were going, but there was no way Mary knew about Cindy. He was with her long before the others. The only way they could find out is if Cindy teased Harvey. Lloyd hoped she was okay. They arrived at Cindy's house first. Laura turned off the siren and flashing lights 4 blocks from Cindy's house. Lloyd jumped out of the car before Laura could open her door after throwing the car into the parking lot. Lloyd stopped at the front door, listening. The door was ajar. The frame was mutilated. Laura ran up to him, holding her gun at the ready. "Don't do anything like that again," she whispered in a hoarse voice. Lloyd nodded, pointing to the door. Laura nodded in response. "Stay behind me. I hope they're not armed," she said. Slowly pushing the door open, Laura looked behind the frame. The living room was dark, but they both saw light in the back room. They both heard a scream. Lloyd thought the couple had just arrived. Laura entered the house, ready to protect them. Lloyd was right behind her, ready to watch her back. Lloyd never considered himself a brave man, but he would protect any friend to the last. Even this woman he met in just a day, he felt that she was his responsibility. Slowly, they moved along the corridor towards the light. Laura checked every room they passed through, shining a flashlight into them. In one of the rooms, they found a child, a little girl. She sat in the corner, trembling with fear. Laura walked up to her, told her to go to the closet, and told her to stay there. We continued down the corridor. When they reached the room with the light, Mary was standing right in front of them, watching what was happening on the bed. "Take her, Lloyd, take her," Mary shouted. Laura pointed to Mary, then to Lloyd. He nodded. She walked past Mary, who screamed in surprise. Lloyd grabbed her from behind, wrapping his arm around her neck. She squealed in fear. Harvey wasn't paying attention. "Okay, Harvey, get off your wife," Laura screamed. "What?" Harvey shouted in surprise. "Police. Now get away from your wife," Laura screamed. Harvey turned to see who was behind him when Cindy hit him in the side of the neck. Harvey groaned in pain. Mary fainted after hearing Laura's words about the police. Lloyd stepped forward and grabbed Harvey by the hair, pulling him away from Cindy. He screamed in pain like a little girl. Laura stepped forward and handcuffed Harvey. At this time, 2 other policemen appeared with their guns drawn. Lloyd froze as they shouted, "Police!" Cindy was crying. Mary began to come to her senses. "Shackle her," Laura told the 2 officers, showing them the badge. "What about him?" one of them asked, pointing at Lloyd. "He's with me," Laura said, sitting on top of Harvey. Lloyd walked up to Cindy and hugged her. When she saw that it was him, she collapsed into his arms with a sigh of relief. Laura was on the phone, calling an ambulance. "Kari?" Cindy suddenly remembered her daughter. "She's fine," Lloyd reassured her. Laura nodded and followed the girl. A few seconds later, she returned with Kari, who ran to her mother. Lloyd stepped aside. Cindy grabbed his hand. "Stay, please?" Cindy asked. Lloyd looked at Laura. She smiled at him and nodded. Lloyd stayed. He knew Laura would go to the hospital with Cindy. He and Laura had a very long night. Detective Meeker arrived half an hour later to take Mary and Harvey to jail. Mary was crying. Harvey swore loudly. Both will now be charged with 3 counts of assault. Lloyd simply watched as they were taken away, shaking his head. He wondered how he could have missed what Mary was like. He was angry at himself for not recognizing her. Problem? He was riding in the ambulance with Cindy and Kari. Laura followed the ambulance in the car. At the hospital, Cindy was taken to the emergency room. Kari and Lloyd were sitting in the waiting room. Laura went with Cindy. Kari and Lloyd were talking quietly. She was a very beautiful girl who looked exactly like her mother. The social worker came over and took information about Kari. When she wanted to take Kari to the shelter, Lloyd told her to call Detective Holbrook. "What's the matter, Lloyd?" Laura asked. "Mrs. Albright wants to take Kari to a shelter," Lloyd explained. This is standard procedure, Laura said. Her mother will be discharged tomorrow. This morning. She can stay here. I will take responsibility for her. Cindy is my friend. Laura turned to Mrs. Albright. Mrs. Albright nodded and left. Are you sure about this, Lloyd? Laura asked. Yes, I would do this for any friend, Laura, Lloyd pleaded. Okay, I'll sort it out. Sorry for. It's not your fault, Lloyd. I'll be back soon. We'll take Kari to breakfast. You and her can see her mom while I sort this out. Fine. Great. Thank you so much, Laura, Lloyd said, walking up to Laura and hugging her. Laura and Lloyd were surprised when Kari joined them. Oh my God, Laura said, hugging them both. Lloyd stepped back and looked into Laura's eyes. He saw surprise and a little sadness in them. Lloyd raised his eyebrows. She smiled at him. This rarely happens to me, she said, looking at Kari. Oh. Oh, Kari repeated after Lloyd. Laura laughed. Kari hugged Laura again. Lloyd simply smiled as he looked at them both. Laura smiled and hugged Kari back. Thank you, Laura said to Kari. You're welcome, Laura, Kari replied with a smile. I'll be back soon. Cindy is in room 5530, right across from Carla. Thank you, Lloyd said as he watched Laura hurry. I like her, Kari said. Me too, Lloyd replied with a smile to Kari. Let's go see your mom. When they got to Cindy's room, she was resting quietly. She smiled when she saw Lloyd. Seeing that he had brought Kari, she burst into joy. Lloyd lifted Kari onto the bed with her mother. They hugged. Are you okay, Mom? Kari asked. Yes, darling. Just tired. Me too. Lloyd kept me awake so I could see you. And some woman, for some reason, wanted to take me to a shelter. Lloyd stopped her along with Laura. I like Laura. I think Lloyd likes Laura too. Cindy looked at Lloyd. Lloyd rolled his eyes, then smiled at Cindy. Thank you, Lloyd, Cindy said, hugging her daughter. The two of them settled down on a hospital bed. Lloyd sat down in the only chair. He watched Cindy and Kari fall asleep. He was almost asleep when Laura tapped him on the shoulder. Raising his head, he smiled at her. She pointed to the door. He stood up and followed her into the hallway. Everything is settled with the children's service. You are responsible for Kari until her mother is discharged. I still want to have a drink with you, Laura said. I would really like a drink now, but I'll wait. Are you working tomorrow? Or rather today? Lloyd asked, laughing. No, but I'm very tired. Laura took one of her cards and wrote something on the back. Here is my home number. Call me later, much later. I'll come get you and we'll have a drink, she said. Thank you, I'll call you. Is 7 o'clock too late or too early? Lloyd asked. No, this is perfect. Maybe we should eat first, Laura suggested with a smile. I'd love to, Lloyd replied. Laura walked up to Lloyd and hugged him tightly. Surprised, Lloyd hugged her back. He even touched her cheek with his lips. He heard her sigh, then quickly moved away and left. Lloyd looked after her. Yes, she was a very good woman. Lloyd really liked her. End. Subscribe to our channel so that your love does not cheat on you, and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you are under 18 years old, don't even think, click on the next one.